Please bring on stage Michael, Charlie, Radhika, and Wasim. Welcome on stage.
Hi, good morning, everybody. How are we? It's been a good morning so far, I think. Well, I want to thank Meltwater and welcome today's panelists. Allow me to introduce Wasim Khaled, CEO, Blackbird, and co-founder, Blackbird.AI. On the end here, we have Mike McLoughlin, Senior Director, Corporate External and Legal Affairs at Microsoft. And right next to me, we have Charlie Baldwin, SVP, Insights and Analytics, North America Lead at We Communications. Now, before we kick off the panel, I wanted to ask everybody a quick question. With a show of hands, you can clap, whatever you feel is comfortable. How many of you feel confident your organization could tell the difference between a real reputation crisis and a coordinated narrative attack? Don't be shy. Yeah? Okay. Good, all right. The gap, for those of you that don't know, is what today's conversation is about. The speed of AI in today's online public square, synthetic content, and coordinated amplification has changed the job of communications. The question is no longer, what are people saying about us? The question is, what is real? What is being manufactured? What is moving? And what should we do before our response makes it worse? Wasim, we'll start off with you. You're one of the few people who understood the new risk landscape years ago, and that disinformation and deepfakes are just a piece of the problem. You coined the term narrative attacks. What is a narrative attack exactly?
Sure. So, I think it's important to understand why come up with the terminology in the first place, right? So every new threat that kind of enters the space needs terminology and syntax. And Blackbird's background was really in the public sector space to begin with. So we were looking at adversaries who were trying to shape human perception and public perception. And so, as we started surfacing more and more of these signals, and we ended up in like just the thousands of signals that help you understand new techniques and tactics that these adversaries were using in defense category, we had to make it explainable. So part of it was about education. And so narrative attacks was something we came up with, about 2 years ago, probably like 10 blocks from here. And my team was like, how do we explain this? And so a narrative attack, it's when an adversary assesses the information environment and they use very specific surgical maneuvers to shape and drive the narrative, probably to the communities and the hyper-agenda-driven groups that you really don't want looking too closely at the issue at hand. And so being able to surface this risk is really what makes narrative intelligence function, because once you can separate the narrative attack from everything else, you're able to understand how you actually need to then shape your own narratives and own your narratives.
Appreciate that clarity. Michael, Microsoft has been one of the most vocal corporate voices on AI governance and content provenance. From where you sit at CELA, why have narrative attacks moved to something boards and regulators are treating as first-order enterprise risk?
It's a changing world at the risk of stating the obvious. I've been in our legal organization and government affairs organization for a little bit over a decade. And one of the fundamental observations I've had is just the rate of change continues to accelerate. Our department is referred to by Satya and other leaders in the company as the Department of Trust. So we think it's really our mission to help do what we can to ensure that information ecosystems are being held accountable, that people are able to discern, quote unquote, the truth. And that part of our charter is to ensure that we are communicating with our stakeholders, our customers, our shareholders, the broader community in effective, efficient, and most importantly, rapid ways. And one of the fundamental observations we've had is just that the proliferation of information channels, the way information gets disseminated today, is not like it was a decade ago. Going back in time, we would, look to leading publications, news outlets. I'm not going to say there were merely a handful of them, but there weren't the sea of information sources that there are today. And we could quickly engage and validate but information spreads so rapidly through so many channels now. A big part of the challenge that we have is just ensuring that we have the right processes to listen, to validate, and ensure we're sharing information where appropriate.
I mean, the landscape is changing so quickly. Charlie, We Communications sits at the other end, with the humans whose job it is to rebuild trust after a narrative attack lands. When a client enters a crisis today, what feels fundamentally different from a traditional reputation event?
Yeah, I'm going to start just by quickly saying We Communications is a global agency. We support clients across the world, across consumer, technology, healthcare. So we see a lot of things in this space. And although I have others on my team who are, the crisis and issues expert, I think I'm a pretty good sponge for their expertise. So I will do my best to present what they would say in this situation. I support a global food service and beverage provider who likes to say that today, even my good news is bad news, which I think is a nice sort of encapsulation of the world that we're in, which is that everything is an attack surface, even if it's the news moment you've been working on for a long time, a product launch. So when you ask me about the difference between a reputation building moment and a crisis moment, I think that the lines are blurring. And as communicators, we need to be on the front foot all the time. We need to be aware that there are risks that are hidden even in the things that we think are bulletproof. Thankfully, the tools and I think our collective data literacy as a function has accelerated and improved to the point where we can be more equipped and more capable of managing this gray area that we now operate in.
Absolutely. And before you can advise or before comms can respond, someone has to answer the basic question: what are we looking at? Wasim, when Blackbird flags something as a narrative attack, what do the signals tell you that it's not just normal conversation?
I mean, the simplest way to think about this is the distinction between conversation, coordination. But there's a lot to unpack there. From a signals perspective, again, going back to 8 years of working with the defense community, NATO, public sector, and Fortune 500s, we've amassed all of these signal sets around how adversarial actors act upon what's happening in the information space to create maximum damage. And today, organizations, brands, the bigger you are, the more likely you are to get hit by a narrative attack that aligns with the agenda of an adversary. The signals could be things like inauthentic coordination. They could be generative AI or the detection of deepfakes within the content. Or it could just be any number of combined signals and techniques using things like agentic swarms, for example, to prop up a narrative, to drive them towards a very specific group of, say, boycotters that are going to drive some sort of major real-world physical, operational, financial, or reputational damage to the organization. I think the most important thing to understand is there are actually billions of dollars that have been spent in building the infrastructure for narrative attacks. And today, the cost of a narrative attack has gone down about 500x. So if you can't see those signals, can't see all of the new tools that they're using to drive that narrative, you certainly can't understand how to predict which way to go with your playbooks and your responses. So the key thing is being able to understand that signal and act upon them as quickly as possible.
Absolutely. Charlie, you lead insights and analytics. So you see both signal and what clients do with it. When something starts moving fast against a brand, how do comms teams decide whether it's real attention or manufactured amplification? And how often do they get that call wrong within the first hour?
There are, I think, as I said, we have the ability to diagnose and dissect a conversation from its origin to its amplification points in ways that are completely different than we had even a year ago. So when I think about the question of how you determine if something is manipulated or real. In some ways, it almost doesn't matter because the perception is the reality, and that a swarm of bots can create the semblance of a true, public groundswell, and we need to treat both the situation where it's real people who are acting and creating an uproar, and the situation where bots, agents are creating that perception with similar care and thoughtful analysis. Yeah, I think that we are able to more quickly identify when something is inauthentic now than we could before, and that is a powerful lever that we need to be pulling more frequently and understanding more deeply.
I couldn't agree more. I want to bring this down to like the first hour crisis across the table. So here's an example. A synthetic video of a company's CEO saying something completely unhinged starts spreading, because that's never happened. Engagement is climbing, and reporters and detractors are circling. Wasim, what does narrative intelligence tell that organization?
We CEOs never say unhinged things
Nope.
don't cause problems for anyone else in the company,
Nope.
right? No, I mean, look, CEOs of many companies, especially the biggest ones, are out there saying things that cause comms teams and many major issues, right? I mean, that's just something that's going to happen. People are going to speak their mind about what they believe in. And this particular example is happening all the time, by the way. Like, deepfakes of CEOs have become a big problem. Of course, the very first thing you have to do is understand, okay, is it a deepfake or not? That's just like the very first thing you have to do. But that's like a pretty binary and somewhat solved problem. We have our own deepfake models and whatnot. But I think what's really important from a narrative intelligence narrative perspective is, like, how is that deepfake actually moving? Like, what is the structure of the movement of that deepfake in the information environment? And why is that important? Because if you can see that, how much impact has that video actually done? How many different groups has it actually shifted? Like, if you're looking at those actors, and just a little bit about how Blackbird's technology works, we think about it through three lenses. We give our operators and people who are using our platform the ability to see narrative, of course. There's the story. We've been talking about that a lot yesterday, today. But networks, that was kind of our first patent pending technology where we took narratives and let you see it, actually visualize it like a contagion, because sometimes that's what it becomes. Who is it actually, how is it changing their behavior, right? What are they doing as a result of that narrative and the signals that drive it? And so once you understand that, you understand the impact of a deepfake, who you're recruiting into this new mindset, and only then can you actually drive action. And so for us, we're actually taking that next step from narrative detection, of narrative attacks, narrative intelligence, to now where we're going next with that, which is simulate what might happen, right? Based on things like synthetic personas, using real data. And this is something that's experimental. We've gotten it out to a couple of our defense clients, but it's pretty amazing, a little bit scary, right? Because you can kind of war game and scenario plan out, day 1, day 2, day 3. How might those narratives cause the most damage? So think about running like 10,000 simulations with all of your data and the personas, and then being able to actually have your playbooks for incident response and comms ready to go should those things actually occur. And this is kind of the slowest things are ever going to be moving, which is a little scary, right? It's just going to get faster from here. So that feedback loop of, you have that particular incident, and then being able to react to that, it has to happen at machine speed, and these are the kind of technologies that will help you get there.
And Michael, what does that unlock from when you have that type of intelligence from a trust perspective?
Yeah, I mean, just to build on what Wasim just said, the way I think about it now is, as opposed to trust formally, even going back in my time with the company, where we would conduct surveys and we would have baselines. Trust today is continuously computed, happening in almost real time. And so it becomes a bit of a risk management dynamic. And we look to partners like we and Blackbird to help us better understand our landscape. And the thing that I'd emphasize, just in terms of the work that I do daily, is it for me, a lot of it is about trying to anticipate and be proactive and set up early warning systems. and be clear in terms of our principles on certain jugularly important issues. Because if you can get to that place when something does happen, you're in a position to issue a statement quickly, to create clarity through the channels that you can control, and then look to your partners, again, like Blackbird, to help you understand what the dissemination dynamic is. How is this information flowing? Where is it coming from? And then develop strategies with partners like we to counter that. And they can help us scale and achieve the engagement success that we're looking for.
And Charlie, with an understanding of what's happening under the surface and this kind of insight, how do comms respond without making it worse or stepping on any landmines?
Yeah, well, I think it starts with really diagnosing the situation properly. So what we like to do is recommend, excuse me, essentially a schema of qualitative and quantitative indicators, because the best tools in the world still might view one mention as the same as another mention, but if one of those mentions is Elon Musk tweeting about you, it means a lot more than me tweeting about you. And that is the nuance, that's the qualitative that has to be a part of determining and diagnosing what's going on. So, I think having all the information is critical, because then you can avoid making unforced errors. And you stole what I was going to say, Michael. I was going to say that I'm on a bit of a crusade to lessen our use of predictive in this industry a bit. I think we all realize we don't have crystal balls. It's kind of hard to predict the news. But I think we can all agree that we can be better prepared. We can be anticipatory. We can make sure that we've done all the due diligence necessary to extract all available information from tools, from internal teams, so that we are fully equipped to deal with whatever comes next. And in many ways, I think the communicator's job is simple but difficult. We have to shape, defend, and protect our company, our product, services, and our people. But all we can do is try to do the best job that we can and be true to that purpose. And I think most of the time we'll get it right.
Great. Now, I'm going to take a bit of a step back to more of a geopolitical position here. Wasim, how do you help organizations understand geopolitical conflict or state actors trying to pressure a company through narrative attacks?
My favorite.
Yes.
I think when you have a new war spinning up once every other quarter, it's important to understand how Fortune 500s, the S&P, how they're going to be impacted. And you got to think like geopolitical conflict now is turning into what I like to think of as geo-economic confrontation, right? So what do I mean by this? Well, country A bombs a hospital over here, and you get 1 million medical records wiped out over here as kind of an asymmetric response to that. Not quite what comms leaders signed up for 10 years ago when they got into the space, right? And there's information operations that run alongside these kinds of operations to then exacerbate how the public, your shareholders, your employees, your investors, how they think about those kinds of actions, right? Because they're pointing and kind of using the narrative, and they're shooting through your brand to make a point, right? Because, like you're saying, no matter what you say, as a brand, you're creating risk. And I like to think about it as if you take position 1, you're going to piss off this group of people here, right? If you take position 2, you're going to piss this group of people off over here. And then if you want to play it safe and say nothing, you might just piss everybody off, right? So sometimes you're trying to decide who are the least number of people that I can upset with the position that I'm going to take as a company. Companies in Fortune 500s, from an executive protection standpoint to an infrastructure standpoint to your own teams, they are under attack. They are under duress. So if they can hit you, it's part of the long geopolitical play where damaging Western countries over the course of, say, a decade impacts that adversary, right? I mean, your 401ks, for example, if you damage a company and do billions of dollars worth of damage to it, that's the way in which it's death by 1,000 paper cuts in their mind. So you're stuck in the middle, thinking about like brand reputation when they're actually specifically out to take you down or take you down a notch, right? So you have to be able to see the signals. So coming back to being able to specifically see within this narrative attack, 40% of this conversation are, CCP propaganda, so Chinese state propaganda, right? Or it's an Iranian proxy agent network that is trying to drive 80% of this conversation. I would think you'd want to know that because then you're not treating it like a reputational issue anymore. You might be talking to your legal, your government affairs, your cyber and threat intel. And I think comms leaders are still at the tip of the spear because you all are trying to help shape the perception of the organization, but bringing in these other team members are really critical because you need that kind of 360 operating picture. So being able to see those signals are now, I think, key, and you would be absolutely shocked how often there are state actors or multiple state actors that are amplifying the narratives, and it's totally invisible most of the time.
I know that that's still something I'm always amazed by. Michael, with quantifiable evidence of a possibility of state-linked or geopolitical activity, what changes operationally and from a trust perspective?
Yeah, I mean, Wasim just sort of underscored this a little bit. A big part of what we do is not just comms-led, but we have a global government affairs group that we work with very closely that can reach out to international stakeholders and help create clarity in situations where there's confusion, significant confusion. I mean, one of the key learnings that we've had is there's this principle, I just learned about it a few days ago. It's called the liar's dividend. And sometimes these actors can, ultimately be uncovered for sharing something that was not true, but at the end of the day, they call into question the nature of the issues themselves and undermines credibility in people's confidence around some of these issues. And so sometimes these attacks are just about creating chaos and introducing doubt in situations where perhaps a limited amount had existed previously. So a big part of what we try and do, and I said it a moment ago, but I'll reemphasize it because if there's one point I want to leave folks with, it's this. It is really being clear in advance on your principles around particularly sensitive issues. Because the last thing you want to do in the throes of one of these heated moments where the media is spinning up and disinformation is at a high and there's confusion is to not be clear, not to be able to be clear as quickly as possible. And so adjudicating these issues internally with your companies, with your stakeholders, and having a very clear stance. We typically will present these as principles. Microsoft's 5 principles on topics X, Y, or Z is a way of helping people understand our business model and our approach, ideally in a way that helps to build trust and drive home the message that we're consistent in our thinking and our behavior.
Yeah, I'm hearing trust a lot here. Charlie, how do you communicate with confidence today when you have evidence of state-driven amplification of a narrative versus just suspecting it?
Yeah, we all know gravity exists, right? I can't necessarily point to it, but there are, in some ways, our tools have gotten better at being able to specifically identify the fingerprints, the digital fingerprints that match particular state actors. But I think that with the right tradecraft, if you're asking the right questions of the data, you can identify telltale signs that suggest that there are strings being pulled. I would say that thankfully, most companies don't have to deal with that too frequently, but to everybody's point, these are macro impacts that change geoeconomic trends and may have an indirect impact on your business or on your supply chain or things of that nature. So it's good to, at the very least, be aware that these are powerful forces that are manipulating things.
I agree. I think that the tension that every comms leader kind of feels and knows now is speed versus certainty, and moving too slowly can be dangerous, but moving too fast or too loudly can also damage the narrative. I'm going to come back to you, Charlie, and ask, how do you decide whether to engage, correct, contain quietly, or just let something burn out?
Yeah, well, first of all, my title, I'm an insights and analytics lead. So if you're coming to me with questions about what you should do when the chips are down in a terrible crisis, I would say I am a part of that answer, but I am not the right person to decide in that moment. But I will say, I think it's a bit of an evolution of our industry, and a good one, that the data people, the people who are closest to, let's call it the facts, are increasingly one of the first phone calls, which is, it's a good sign that we want to be more evidence-led, we want to be more rationale-backed. But I guess I would go back to one of things I said earlier, which is all you can do is anticipate and be aware of what you know to be normal and what you know to be abnormal, and that doesn't necessarily just mean a spike in conversation. It could be a very specific qualitative indicator that you know is meaningful, but your tools will not pick up. And from there, you have protocols, you have playbooks, you have things that you can put into action and move quickly.
Yeah, that makes complete sense from a communications side. And the moment that the response has regulatory, platform, employee, customer implications, the room changes and gets complicated very quickly. In a crisis room, it often needs speed and clarity, while operations also require precision and risk control. Michael, you've sat at that intersection. How do you make those instincts work together, and how does better intelligence change the quality of the decision?
Yeah, I mean, if I had to encapsulate it crisply, I'd say it's about being both data-driven, per Charlie, but also principle-led. And it's bringing those two things together in a rapid response sort of mechanism. I mean, we know the drill, right? Like, we have, candidly, geopolitical issues that we deal with on a fairly regular basis that perhaps have been anticipated or perhaps have not been anticipated. And the strategy that we employ and the operational tactic is to convene the right group of leaders, including folks who show up with the facts and the data to help us drive a collective decision across the various stakeholder sets within the company to drive what we hope is the best decision on behalf of our customers and stakeholders. So data, I would say, is the foundation for all these decisions that we make. But at the end of the day, we have to bring the data together with our principles in a way that creates clarity.
And Wasim, what are you seeing when those teams are working from the same intelligence layer instead of separate interpretations of the crisis?
Yeah. Well, I think this concept of fusion centers, where people are trading cyber intelligence, comms intelligence, it's making everything much more powerful. You're able to make decisions on a common operating plane using a platform, or like a lot of companies are brought together for the first time actually on our platform to battle these particular issues. So I would just say it gives you that like single pane of glass to operate from instead of being at odds with these responses, and lets you be very precise and surgical.
Yeah, I think that there's a critical and pivotal operational shift that's occurring. And I have one last question for you guys, because I know we're running out of time. So a bit of a round robin. What is one move every communications leader should leave here with today before they make, sorry, let me restart that. Communications should make before the next narrative crisis hits. Charlie, we'll start with you. Michael, and then Wasim close us out.
All right.
Sure. I think that you should be prepared to put together within 30 minutes a very clear, comprehensive, really importantly, non-defensive, evidence-based accounting of a situation, so that you can bring the facts, you can anchor on the evidence and on what's real and make decisions from that. But every organization, whether you're a one-person shop or a large organization, should have a plan in place to very quickly be able to put that report together.
Michael?
Modernize your listening system strategy, and that in some cases may involve bringing in new partners to help.
I have to echo that, but also we think of it through narrative detection and response. So operationalizing the ability to actually see all of the signal, predict what's going to happen next, and then be able to act on it with the maximum amount of understanding. Because just being loudest and fastest will just get you into more trouble sometimes. But understanding why you can surgically do what you need to do lets everybody operate at machine speed and with awareness.
I think the clear takeaway is that trust is no longer assumed. It's something that organizations have to actively detect, protect, and defend against. The teams that are doing this the best will be the ones that understand the fastest, align earliest, and respond with confidence. Wasim, Michael, Charlie, thank you so much for being with us today. Appreciate it.
Thank you.